January 8, 1945, Norfolk Naval Station, Virginia. Klaus Brenner's legs nearly buckled as he descended the gangplank of the converted Liberty ship that had carried him across the Atlantic, but it wasn't exhaustion that threatened to drop him to his knees, it was the sight that stretched before him like a fever dream made manifest. Electric lights blazed everywhere, transforming the winter darkness into artificial daylight that hurt his eyes after months of blackout protocols. Cranes the size of buildings moved with mechanical precision, their operators perched in glass cabins that gleamed like jewels, trucks lined up in perfect rows, their chrome fixtures catching the light, engines rumbling with a casual waste of fuel that would have powered a German Panzer division for days, and the ships, dear God, the ships. Dozens of them crowded the harbor, some still under construction on scaffolding that rose like metal mountains against the night sky. Each vessel dwarfed anything Klaus had seen in Hamburg's bombed-out ports. These weren't just warships, they were cargo carriers, tankers and transport vessels being built at a rate that German naval intelligence had declared mathematically impossible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Klaus had been a communications officer in the Afrika Korps, captured during the final collapse in Tunisia 18 months earlier. Since then he had moved through British detention facilities in North Africa, endured the cramped conditions of a prison ship crossing, and harbored every expectation that America would reveal itself as the struggling nation that Dr. Goebbels had promised. A country stretched thin by war, rationing its citizens into poverty, maintaining a facade of strength while its industrial base crumbled under the weight of global conflict. The propaganda films had shown breadlines in New York, unemployment riots in Chicago, factory closures in Detroit. America, they were told, was a dying giant, thrashing in its final convulsions before the inevitable Axis victory. The man standing beside Klaus on the gangplank had gone completely silent. Friedrich Weber, a Luftwaffe mechanic shot down over Sicily, stared at the naval yard with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality was being systematically dismantled. His lips moved soundlessly, counting the ships visible in just this one section of harbor. Klaus watched Friedrich's face drain of color as the count exceeded 20, then 30, then stopped because there were simply too many to process. American military police waited at the bottom of the gangplank, but these weren't the brutal guards that German prisoners had been conditioned to expect. They stood relaxed, smoking cigarettes that they stubbed out half-finished without apparent concern for tobacco rationing. Their uniforms looked fresh, properly fitted, made from material that showed no signs of the ersatz fabrics that had plagued German military production for years. Each guard carried equipment that gleamed with newness, leather holsters without cracks or repairs, metal buckles that showed no signs of substitution with inferior materials, boots that had never been resoled. The processing began with an efficiency that impressed even German military minds trained in Prussian precision. American clerks, many of them women, operated typewriters that clacked in mechanical rhythm, producing documentation at speeds that would have required twice the personnel in German facilities. Filing systems organized thousands of prisoner records with color-coded efficiency that made retrieval instantaneous. Telephone systems connected different sections of the facility without the delays and failures that had plagued German communications networks even before the war intensified. Klaus found himself standing before a female clerk who processed his information while simultaneously managing 3 separate tasks. She typed his details, cross-referenced his capture location with existing records, and coordinated with medical staff about examination schedules, all without apparent stress or confusion. Her competence challenged every assumption about female capabilities that National Socialist ideology had promoted. This wasn't a woman performing simple clerical duties under male supervision. This was a professional managing complex administrative systems with authority and expertise. The medical examination delivered the second shock of the evening. American military doctors, working in facilities that blazed with electric light, conducted health assessments using equipment that German field hospitals hadn't possessed even at the war's beginning. X-ray machines hummed in dedicated rooms, producing diagnostic images within minutes. Blood pressure cuffs inflated with mechanical precision. Thermometers registered temperatures instantly without the long waits required by mercury instruments. Stethoscopes amplified heartbeats through rubber tubing that showed no signs of degradation or substitute materials. Captain Robert Harrison, the chief medical officer overseeing prisoner processing, moved through examinations with practiced ease, his instruments laid out on stainless steel trays that reflected the overhead lights. He spoke to each prisoner with clinical detachment that held no hatred, no triumph, just professional assessment of physical conditions that revealed months of inadequate nutrition and medical neglect. When he discovered that Klaus had suffered from recurring malaria contracted in North Africa, Harrison prescribed quinine tablets without hesitation, pulling them from supplies that seemed limitless. The dispensary where Klaus received his medication contained pharmaceutical stocks that exceeded what entire German field hospitals had maintained. Rows of glass bottles lined metal shelves, each labeled with printed tags that identified contents and dosages. Antiseptics, painkillers, antibiotics, and vitamins filled cabinets that stretched along entire walls. An American medic distributed these medications with the casual efficiency of someone who had never experienced genuine shortage, never had to choose which patients deserved treatment based on supply limitations. But it was the casual waste that truly devastated German assumptions about American resource management. As the medical staff changed shifts, Klaus watched orderlies dispose of cotton swabs after single-use, discard bandages that had minor stains, and replace instrument trays that showed slight discoloration. In German facilities, these items would have been sterilized and reused until they literally fell apart. Here they disappeared into waste bins without a second thought, demonstrating a relationship with scarcity that defied comprehension. The holding area where prisoners waited for transport to internment camps provided the first sustained opportunity to observe American military operations at close range. Young servicemen moved through the space with relaxed confidence, their conversations revealing casual attitudes toward equipment and supplies that would have caused riots in German ranks. One soldier complained about the coffee being slightly cold, a grievance that would have been incomprehensible to troops who had brewed ersatz coffee from roasted grain and chicory root. Another grumbled about having to work a double shift, apparently unaware that German soldiers had been functioning on perpetual exhaustion for years. The vehicles that arrived to transport prisoners to temporary housing demonstrated American automotive production through details that spoke louder than statistics. Each truck looked new, its paint unblemished, its tires showing full tread without patches or repairs. Engines started instantly without the temperamental coaxing required by German vehicles running on synthetic fuels and worn components. Headlights blazed with brightness that would have attracted enemy aircraft in European theaters, but here they illuminated roads without apparent concern for blackout protocols. Klaus climbed into a transport truck and found himself sitting on bench seats with cushioned padding, a comfort consideration that German military vehicles had never incorporated even for officer transport. The truck's suspension absorbed road irregularities smoothly, suggesting maintenance standards that kept vehicles in optimal condition rather than merely functional states. Through the canvas covering, he caught glimpses of the passing landscape, and each view delivered fresh evidence of abundance that contradicted every expectation. The naval station gave way to residential areas where houses blazed with interior lights visible through uncurtained windows. No blackout curtains, no air raid preparations, no bomb shelters visible in yards. The civilian population lived without the constant fear that had defined German existence for years, their homes standing intact and illuminated in defiance of war's supposed total mobilization. Klaus saw a woman hanging laundry in her backyard at night, the clothesline illuminated by a porch light that consumed electricity as casually as breathing. Friedrich pressed against the truck's canvas opening, his voice barely above a whisper. "They leave lights burning outside, for laundry. Electricity is so abundant they illuminate empty yards." His training as a Luftwaffe mechanic had given him intimate knowledge of fuel and power limitations. He had worked on aircraft that couldn't fly for lack of aviation fuel, had seen vital operations canceled because electricity had been diverted to more critical facilities. The casual waste of power for trivial convenience revealed resource security that German society had never achieved. The truck passed through a commercial district where storefronts displayed goods behind plate glass windows that had never been shattered by bombing. Mannequins wore clothing that showed no signs of rationing restrictions. Shoe stores featured leather goods without the cardboard substitutes that had appeared in German shops. Hardware stores displayed tools made from real steel rather than the brittle ersatz metals that broke under normal use. Each storefront was a small museum of abundance, showcasing products that had vanished from German availability years before. A grocery store caught Klaus's attention through its sheer impossibility. Even at night, he could see through the windows to shelves stocked with goods arranged in colorful displays. Canned foods lined up in perfect rows, fresh produce visible in bins near the entrance. A butcher counter at the back suggesting meat availability without ration cards or black market negotiations. The store was closed, yet it contained more food than German shops displayed even during business hours in peacetime years. The journey continued through neighborhoods that demonstrated wealth distribution patterns that challenged National Socialist theories about capitalist inequality. Houses varied in size but maintained consistent quality standards. Even modest homes featured amenities that would have marked luxury in German contexts. Garages housed private automobiles despite wartime fuel restrictions. Yards maintained decorative plantings rather than being converted entirely to vegetable production. The working-class districts showed none of the desperate poverty that German propaganda had promised would be endemic in capitalist societies. An industrial area appeared, and Klaus felt his remaining assumptions about urban production capacity collapse entirely.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Factory buildings stretched along the roadside, each one blazing with light from windows that revealed multiple shifts working around the clock. Parking lots filled with workers' vehicles suggested employment levels that contradicted reports of American economic struggle. Smokestacks rose against the night sky, their emissions revealing industrial processes running at full capacity without the brownouts and power rationing that had crippled German manufacturing. One facility particularly caught attention through its sheer scale. A shipbuilding operation sprawled across acres of waterfront, its construction bays holding multiple vessels in various stages of completion. Overhead cranes moved with coordinated precision, their operators working night shifts that suggested construction schedules running continuously. Welding torches sparked like stars across the metal frameworks, each flash representing industrial activity that German yards could no longer maintain. Klaus counted 6 ships under construction in this single facility, more than he had seen in Hamburg's entire port during his last visit home. Friedrich had stopped speaking entirely, his silence more eloquent than any words could have been. As a mechanic who had struggled to keep aircraft operational with inadequate parts and improvised repairs, he understood industrial capacity through direct experience with its absence. Watching American factories operate at this scale during wartime demolished every assessment he had been given about relative production capabilities. The mathematics didn't work. Germany had mobilized its entire society for total war, conscripting women into factories, extending work hours to exhaustion limits, stripping resources from every non-essential function. Yet these American facilities, operating in a nation supposedly divided by labor disputes and racial tensions, produced at levels that suggested resources beyond German comprehension. The temporary housing facility appeared after an hour's drive, and it delivered yet another shock to German expectations about prisoner treatment. The compound occupied former military bases that had been converted for POW use, but the facilities exceeded what most German soldiers had experienced in their own service. Each building featured electric heating that maintained comfortable temperatures despite January cold. Plumbing systems provided hot water without the rationing that had made bathing a luxury in German facilities. Lighting fixtures in every room eliminated the darkness that had defined wartime existence in Germany. The dormitory where Klaus was assigned contained metal frame beds with real mattresses rather than the straw-filled sacks common in German beds. Wool blankets, not the thin cotton substitutes that had appeared as material shortages intensified, lay folded at each bed's foot. Pillows with actual feathers provided comfort that transcended mere functionality. The floor beneath showed polished linoleum rather than bare concrete or rough wood, suggesting maintenance standards that treated even temporary prisoner housing as worthy of proper finishing. Shared bathroom facilities demonstrated American plumbing infrastructure through details that revealed technological sophistication beyond German standards. Multiple shower stalls provided hot water simultaneously without the pressure drops that plagued German systems. Flush toilets featured porcelain fixtures that showed no cracks or repairs. Sinks with running water, both hot and cold, lined one wall with mirrors above each basin. Soap dispensers held actual soap rather than the harsh lye substitutes that German facilities had adopted. Towels, white and clean, hung on racks that suggested regular laundering services. An American officer addressed the assembled prisoners in heavily accented but comprehensible German, explaining facility rules and daily schedules. His tone held neither hostility nor condescension, just straightforward information delivery that treated prisoners as rational adults capable of following reasonable guidelines. He mentioned meal times, work assignments, recreational opportunities, and male privileges with the administrative efficiency of someone managing a military installation rather than a detention facility. The very normalcy of his presentation challenged expectations about enemy brutality and prisoner abuse. That first night, lying on a mattress softer than anything he had slept on during 3 years of military service, Klaus stared at the ceiling while his mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. Around him, other German prisoners wrestled with similar cognitive dissonance, their whispered conversations revealing the systematic demolition of everything they had believed about American weakness and German superiority. Ernst Hoffmann, a former Panzer commander captured in France, spoke from the neighboring bunk. "The ships in that harbor, I counted 37 before I stopped. 37 in one facility. Our intelligence briefings claimed American shipbuilding was collapsing under resource shortages." His voice carried the precision of someone trained in tactical assessment, but now that training was producing conclusions that contradicted every strategic assumption the Wehrmacht had made. Wilhelm Krauss, who had served in the Kriegsmarine before his U-boat was sunk off the American coast, added his observations with the authority of someone who had actually attempted to disrupt American shipping. Those weren't coastal defenders or converted civilian vessels. Those were purpose-built warships and cargo carriers under construction simultaneously. The industrial coordination required to build that many ships while maintaining fuel production, ammunition manufacturing, and vehicle assembly exceeds anything Germany achieved even in peacetime. The conversations continued through the night as men who had believed in inevitable German victory confronted evidence of American capacity that rendered that victory mathematically impossible. Every light they had seen burning unnecessarily represented electricity that German cities could no longer provide. Every truck that transported them demonstrated automotive production that German factories could not match. Every well-fed American they encountered revealed agricultural abundance that German territories could not achieve. Klaus thought about the propaganda films he had watched during training, the newsreels that showed American poverty and industrial failure. He remembered specific images now revealed as lies or distortions. A bread line in New York had been presented as evidence of capitalist collapse, but now he understood it might have been a temporary phenomenon during economic transition rather than systemic failure. Factory closures in Detroit had been described as permanent industrial death, but the facilities he had seen tonight suggested American manufacturing operating at unprecedented levels. The most devastating realization came from understanding what American abundance meant for the war's ultimate outcome. Germany had mobilized every resource, conscripted every available man, converted every factory to war production, rationed its civilians to near starvation levels, and still could not match what America appeared to accomplish while maintaining civilian comfort and industrial diversity. The mathematical implications were inescapable. If America could build this much, feed this well, and light this extravagantly, while simultaneously fighting enemies across multiple continents, then German victory had never been possible. The war had been lost before it truly began, not on battlefields but in the industrial capacity that determined what could be sustained over years of conflict. Sleep came fitfully to men whose worldviews were being reconstructed through direct observation of realities that contradicted every assumption they had carried into captivity. The morning would bring new revelations, new evidence of abundance, new reasons to question everything they had been taught about American weakness and German supremacy. But even in these first hours on American soil, the transformation had begun that would ultimately reshape their understanding of democracy, capitalism, and the true balance of power in the modern world. The morning reveille came not from harsh shouting but from electric bells that rang with mechanical precision throughout the facility. Klaus woke to find sunlight streaming through windows that had no blackout curtains, no protective boarding, no preparation for aerial attack. The glass panes were intact, clean, unmarred by the tape crosses that German civilians applied to prevent shattering during air raids. Outside he could see American guards changing shifts with the casual efficiency of men who had never experienced their homeland under bombardment. The walk to the washing facilities provided the first opportunity to observe the compound in daylight, and the details visible in morning sun delivered fresh shocks to German assumptions. The buildings showed recent construction or maintenance, their exteriors painted in colors that suggested aesthetic considerations rather than mere functionality. Walkways between structures featured concrete paving without cracks or erosion, drainage systems handled overnight rain without the flooding that plagued German facilities. Landscaping included decorative plantings beyond what military necessity required, suggesting resources allocated to appearance even in prisoner compounds. American personnel moved through the facility with equipment that demonstrated supply systems functioning without apparent strain. Maintenance workers carried tools that looked new, their metal surfaces free from the rust and wear that characterized German implements after years of impossible-to-obtain replacements. Cleaning staff used mops and brooms that showed no improvisation with substitute materials. Guards wore uniforms that fit properly, made from fabrics that maintained their shape and color without the fading and stretching that came from extended use of inferior materials. The morning meal would prove even more devastating to German assumptions than the industrial sites of the previous evening. But before entering the dining facility, Klaus noticed the kitchen building itself, a structure that revealed American food preparation infrastructure through details visible even from outside. Ventilation systems expelled cooking odors that suggested meat being prepared in quantities beyond German civilian access. Delivery trucks unloaded supplies from loading docks designed for efficient transfer. Refrigeration units hummed with electrical consumption that would have powered entire German neighborhoods, all devoted to food preservation in a prisoner facility. The compound's layout demonstrated planning considerations that exceeded his containment. Recreation areas featured equipment for sports and exercise, suggesting American belief that even prisoners deserved physical activity beyond forced labor. A library building stood near the administrative offices, implying access to reading materials and intellectual engagement. Medical facilities occupied a dedicated structure with clearly marked emergency entrances, revealing healthcare infrastructure that treated prisoner well-being as requiring professional attention rather than minimal maintenance. What struck Klaus most profoundly was the absence of desperation in everything he observed. German facilities, even before the war's intensification, had shown signs of making do with inadequate resources, repairs using whatever materials were available, improvised solutions to equipment failures, careful rationing of supplies to stretch limited stocks. Here everything functioned as designed, maintained to proper standards, replaced before failure rather than used until complete breakdown. The casual relationship with scarcity suggested resource security that German society had never achieved even in its most prosperous moments. Friedrich emerged from the washing facilities with his face still wet, his expression showing the continued shock of someone whose technical training made the implications inescapable. "The hot water never stopped," he said quietly. 30 men showering simultaneously, and the temperature never dropped. The boiler capacity required for that exceeds what our entire airbase had for all purposes. He had spent years managing limited resources, calculating fuel consumption, rationing power to essential systems. Watching Americans allocate energy to prisoner comfort with such abundance violated every principle of wartime resource management he had learned. The morning assembly brought all prisoners into a central yard where an American officer would explain daily procedures and work assignments. But the gathering itself provided opportunities to observe American military culture through details that challenged German expectations. The guards maintained discipline without the harsh formality that characterized Wehrmacht interactions. They spoke to each other casually while on duty, demonstrating a relationship between ranks that suggested mutual respect rather than rigid hierarchy. When a young private made an error in prisoner count, his sergeant corrected him with instruction rather than humiliation, revealing training methods that valued competence over intimidation. The American flag flying above the administrative building caught morning sun, its colors vibrant against blue sky unmarred by aircraft or anti-aircraft fire. Klaus had seen enemy flags before, captured in battle or observed through binoculars across front lines. But seeing the stars and stripes flying peacefully over American territory without threat or challenge drove home the reality that this nation's homeland remained untouched by war's destruction. No bombed cities here, no refugee columns, no desperate shortages created by disrupted transportation and destroyed infrastructure. America fought its wars on foreign soil while its domestic territory continued functioning normally, an advantage whose strategic implications Klaus was only beginning to comprehend. The officer who addressed them spoke with confidence that came from representing a nation that had never doubted its ultimate victory. He explained work programs that would employ prisoners in agricultural and light industrial tasks, all compensated according to Geneva Convention requirements. He mentioned educational opportunities, religious services, recreational activities, and male privileges that suggested American commitment to treating prisoners according to international standards. His entire presentation assumed that German POWs would remain in custody for extended periods, revealing American confidence about the war's eventual outcome that German propaganda had declared delusional. What the officer didn't mention, but what Klaus observed through careful attention, was the sheer administrative capacity required to manage thousands of prisoners across hundreds of facilities while simultaneously conducting global military operations. The paperwork alone would have overwhelmed German systems that struggled to maintain basic record-keeping under wartime pressures. Yet Americans had created bureaucracies that processed prisoners, tracked their assignments, monitored their health, facilitated their correspondence, and ensured their treatment met international standards, all while maintaining the personnel and resource commitments that fighting a two-front war demanded. The work assignments themselves revealed American assumptions about labor and productivity that differed fundamentally from German practices. Rather than extracting maximum work through minimal sustenance, Americans appeared to believe that adequately fed and reasonably treated prisoners would be more productive in the long term. The assignments matched skills to tasks rather than using prisoners as undifferentiated labor. Mechanics were assigned to maintenance facilities, clerical workers assisted with administrative duties, agricultural workers went to farms. This efficiency suggested economic thinking that valued optimal resource utilization over ideological demonstrations of power. As the assembly concluded and prisoners dispersed to their assigned duties, Klaus found himself part of a group designated for agricultural work at nearby farms. The truck that transported them provided another opportunity to observe American civilian territory in daylight, and what he saw through that brief journey would prove as devastating to his assumptions as anything he had witnessed the previous evening. The roads they traveled showed maintenance standards that exceeded German highways even before wartime degradation had set in. Pavement remained smooth without the potholes and cracks that plagued European routes. Road markers appeared at regular intervals with clear signage. Traffic moved with organized efficiency despite the number of vehicles, suggesting transportation infrastructure designed to handle high volumes without the congestion that choked German cities. Private automobiles appeared everywhere, their presence so common that Klaus initially didn't register the significance. Then the numbers penetrated his consciousness. Dozens of cars traveling on ordinary roads during a weekday morning. Civilians driving to work or conducting personal business without apparent fuel rationing or travel restrictions. Each vehicle represented metal, rubber, glass, and fuel allocated to individual convenience rather than being commandeered for military purposes. The casual waste of strategic resources for non-essential transportation revealed economic abundance that rendered German sacrifice meaningless. The farms where prisoners would work appeared ahead, and their appearance delivered fresh evidence of agricultural capacity that explained how America could feed both its military and civilian populations while maintaining prisoner nutrition standards that exceeded German civilian rations. Fields stretched to horizons, their scale dwarfing European agricultural holdings that had been divided through generations of inheritance. Mechanized equipment sat parked near barn complexes, tractors and combines representing capital investment in productivity that German farms could never achieve. Irrigation systems visible across planted areas suggested water management infrastructure that removed agriculture's dependence on natural rainfall patterns. The farmer who greeted them, a weathered man named Johnson who spoke no German, communicated through an interpreter with the relaxed confidence of someone whose livelihood wasn't threatened by war's disruptions. His farm, Klaus would learn, produced grain on a scale that would have supplied entire German districts. He employed mechanized equipment that reduced labor requirements to fractions of what European agriculture demanded. His productivity per acre exceeded German yields through fertilization and pest control methods that required chemical industries Germany could no longer support. What struck Klaus most powerfully was Johnson's attitude toward abundance. He spoke of crop yields with the casual dissatisfaction of someone whose standards had never been lowered by necessity. He complained about prices without the desperation of someone facing starvation if harvests failed. He discussed government agricultural programs with the critical perspective of someone who could afford to evaluate policy rather than simply accept whatever support kept him alive. His entire bearing suggested economic security that German farmers hadn't known even before the war destroyed their markets and conscripted their labor. The work itself proved lighter than Klaus expected, managed with attention to safety and reasonable hours that contradicted German assumptions about capitalist labor exploitation. Johnson provided water breaks without prisoners having to request them. He demonstrated proper equipment operation rather than simply demanding production. He treated German POWs with practical courtesy that suggested his primary concern was getting work done efficiently rather than extracting maximum suffering from enemy prisoners. During a midday break, Johnson's wife appeared with lunch for the workers, and her arrival delivered another shock to Klaus's understanding of American society. She drove her own vehicle, a small car that suggested individual transportation access, extended even to farm wives in rural areas. She wore clothing that showed no signs of rationing restrictions, her dress made from printed fabric that would have been impossible to obtain in Germany. She spoke to her husband as an equal partner in farm management rather than a subordinate, revealing gender dynamics that contradicted National Socialist ideology about women's proper roles. The lunch she provided demonstrated agricultural abundance through variety that exceeded imagination. Sandwiches made with real white bread, thick slices of ham, fresh lettuce and tomatoes despite winter season, cheese that showed no signs of substitute ingredients, fresh milk in glass bottles, cold despite lack of refrigeration, suggesting dairy production so abundant that farm families consumed directly what would have been preserved for essential distribution in German territories. Apples from storage that maintained quality months after harvest, revealing preservation infrastructure that prevented spoilage of surplus production. Klaus sat on a fence rail eating food that exceeded what he had consumed even during peacetime visits to prosperous relatives, watching an American farm wife distribute abundance to enemy prisoners without apparent strain on her household supplies. The psychological implications cut deeper than hunger could reach. This wasn't propaganda designed to impress prisoners. This was normal operation of agricultural systems that produced such surplus that casual generosity to enemies didn't threaten domestic security. Frederick sat beside him, mechanically consuming his sandwich while his eyes scanned the farm's equipment and infrastructure. The tractor alone, he said quietly, represents metal allocation that German industry stopped providing to agriculture years ago. The fuel to run it exceeds what our entire squadron received some months, and he has 3 of them. Plus the combine, the irrigation pump, the truck for transport. One American farmer controls more mechanical power than a German battalion. The afternoon work continued under Johnson's supervision, and Klaus noticed details that revealed the depth of American agricultural development. The barn contained spare parts for equipment, suggesting supply chains that provided replacements without desperate improvisation. Tool sheds held specialized implements for specific tasks, rather than the multi-purpose tools that German farmers used for everything. Seed storage facilities protected next year's planting with chemical treatments that prevented pest damage and moisture degradation. Every system showed planning that assumed continued resource availability rather than making do with whatever survived. As the sun declined and the workday concluded, Klaus and his fellow prisoners loaded back into transport trucks for the return to camp. The brief glimpse of American agricultural operations had revealed economic foundations that explained military capacity. Nations that could mechanize farming to this extent freed labor for industrial production. Societies that generated food surpluses could support large military forces without starving civilian populations. Economies that allocated resources to productivity enhancement rather than mere survival could sustain war efforts that overwhelmed opponents operating at subsistence levels. The evening would bring another meal that challenged assumptions, another night of whispered conversations as prisoners tried to reconcile observations with beliefs. But already, less than 24 hours after first setting foot on American soil, Klaus felt the foundations of his worldview crumbling like buildings under artillery barrage. Everything he had believed about democratic weakness, capitalist inefficiency, and inevitable Axis victory was being systematically demolished not through propaganda or coercion, but through simple observation of realities that contradicted every assumption National Socialism had taught him to accept as truth. The transformation became complete during Klaus's 3rd week in captivity when he witnessed something that shattered his final defenses. An American factory tour, arranged as part of prisoner orientation, revealed production lines assembling aircraft at rates German intelligence had dismissed as Allied propaganda. Workers, including women and minorities whom Nazi ideology deemed inferior, operated sophisticated machinery with precision that exceeded Luftwaffe maintenance standards. The facility produced more planes monthly than Germany's entire remaining industrial capacity. Frederick wept silently beside him, finally accepting what his technical mind could no longer deny. That evening, Klaus wrote his first letter home, carefully worded to pass censors but carrying truths that would reshape his family's understanding. He described not brutality but abundance, not weakness but strength beyond comprehension. Around him, other prisoners composed similar messages, each one a small seed of reality that would eventually grow into Germany's post-war reconciliation with democratic ideals. The psychological earthquake these men experienced would ripple through German society for generations. They had departed as believers in Aryan supremacy and returned as witnesses to democracy's quiet power. Every illuminated street had been an argument against totalitarianism. Every well-fed worker had demolished propaganda about capitalist exploitation. They came as enemies and departed as reluctant students of a system that defeated them not through cruelty, but through the simple demonstration of what free societies could achieve when human potential was unleashed rather than controlled. In their transformation lay the seeds of Germany's future embrace of democratic principles and the foundation for lasting alliance between former enemies. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.